Hello and most welcome to H910. Well, I don't think it has ever progressed this fast, really, earlier. It's quite amazing. I did 4 recordings one day and they were both a bit too long even. So I think that's a sure sign there has happened a significant change. A lot of this change is coming from the new discoveries instigated firstly by Rudolf Gachet and his fantastic book Taint of the Mirror. Do get that one. That is both a book to learn and keep as like relearning, spicing up old knowledge, and also repeat, because repetition lies at the core of all understanding, says Rudolf Gachet. Without repetition there is no learning, and as I said so many times before, this is a complete understanding that learning and understanding always, without exception, is gradual. Direct understanding doesn't exist, and if you think you have it, you haven't got it. It's very close to the reply Louis Armstrong gave when somebody asked him how he invent his melodies and songs. Well, if you don't know it, you ain't got it, was his reply. And I think the same goes for deconstruction. It doesn't really help to ask, you need to do it. You need to do the nitty-gritty hard work, and in the end, eventually you will come to the learning situation. The learning situation is always by means of opening up, making the limitations dissolve, or seeing them for what they are, just limitations that can be used, and they can also be transcended, depending on what is more convenient. And not all limitations should be done with directly. Some should even be kept, but that's another story. There is, in the apeiron, real limits. Today's lecture I named Getting the Not Knowing into Your Life while in order to you can have many thoughts going parallel. This is the question about simultaneity. I discussed that one before, and we seem to think we can only do one thing at a time, and in a similar mode we can only think one thing at a time, and I would say that is a devastating limitation, unnecessary and incredibly crippling. And it's similar to the idea that objects occupy space, and you need them to occupy space. You make limitations, you construct the negative surroundings, and this negative surroundings is necessary for you to have the object. That is in itself a limitation of an openness that was more open before you made the object. It's a very costly way of doing things, and they also cause crowdiness, and they cause very, very real crowdiness in thinking. I mentioned many lectures ago about 3 different ways of thought, or rather how thought can act. And one is this intrusive thoughts you don't want to have suddenly appear, and you seem not to get them out of your skull, your head, your mind. The second thing is overcrowdedness, something called balloon head, when your whole head feels filled up with all these different thoughts, and it's very hard to discern what is what. Third state may be a bit more difficult to handle, is rushing thoughts. It's when they rush all over the place and you will not be able to stop them. This is very similar to putting some liquid into a sealed container and heat it up. Atoms will start to bounce at each other, and they will make the other atoms bounce as well, and you get warmth, heat. In the end, it can even start to expand or even explode. This is exactly the same thing that is happening when you have these rushing thoughts. It is a side effect of letting thoughts take space, limiting them in a three-way mode. The first way being by discerning them against background of empty space that we usually call unawareness. So around each thought there is a piece of unawareness, like a background or negative space. You need that to cut out the thought. The second one is that thought, once established, will occupy random space in the mind area, in the mind space. They will not come easily because they will be sort of squarey and pear-shaped and will not have that flexibility that a more open thinking can be. The third thing, they don't come in any specific order. The order gets constructed as you create them, and they remain in that order. And this is also the cause of something called intrusive thoughts. Once you start making your thoughts, you made them in a random order. That also means that randomness will regulate when that thought comes back. It's a little bit like having a song stuck in your head. You just heard it by happenstance. It was unintentional that you heard it and it gets stuck. If you randomly, by happenstance, without thinking, automatically, by having the ego in working order with the objects, you will construct these random orders. Once established, they are very hard to get rid of, and they crave their space. The first thing and the third thing are a bit similar because there is a rushing thing. In the middle thing, it's the pure density of thoughts or mass of thoughts, the balloon head or the balloon mind, that causes the problems. And it's that we made ready fixed divisions for each thought, a bit similar how we make the objects. Once constructed, it's not easy to remodel them, and that is necessary for thinking. In the end, we have these very ungainly bits that doesn't really fit the thinking we want to do, nor the act we want to do. They are random, happenstance, space demanding, and do not fit a purpose. If they are more open, it will be much like the model of time, or whatever you call it, described by Julian Barber, a progression of things that run smoothly, caused by likeness or difference, depends how you see it. Likeness in the meaning that most of it is different, but a certain likeness can also be the opposite. It's a very big likeness, but there is a small difference. There you have this flow of things happening, and they adjust themselves. Yes, there could actually be a point here. If you get skilled at handling your thoughts and not doing so much of objectifying of the thoughts, you will notice that your thinking runs much smoother. It doesn't take that much space, and action happens without too much strain. Whereas in the regular thinking, with all these objects and thought being delineated, put in a random order, you have heavy thinking, and all decisions come after great strain. How on earth can you organize your thinking when everything is random from the outset and space demanding? How easy is it that it organizes itself into sound, clear thinking with clear direction? Directionality itself has been put into peril because of the randomness. And this is connected, of course, to awareness and this fixation with existence. We want the thoughts to exist. What does that mean? It means that the ego observes them, make them definite thoughts, similar to the memory being a true memory because the ego has looked at it and given it the stamp of reality, and then putting them automatically in this random order called cause and effect. Well, a cause and effect in itself rather peculiar, because we just automatically pick one trait in big presencing that contains everything all around you, and in that we say that that peculiar thing is causing the other thing to happen in the next moment. So we are building more and more randomness into the system for each time. And it's also this with the distance. To have thoughts delineated with borders themselves take some space, making them take energy, and it's also the problem of polarity. Either you choose that thought or you put it in negation. And as you can see, when the surrounded area is not defined, it's just the other, it's just the marginalized surroundings or the background. The emptiness that you use to create thoughts, or rather the empty space that you use up in your mind to create thoughts that becomes sort of obstacles to thinking. And another very interesting problem, which I would say is the main thing here that obstructs parallelism in thinking, is the space in between the thoughts, both in time and in space. That space seems to be lacking in awareness in this model. Only the thoughts have, for some reasons, awareness, where there is a non-awareness in the space in between the thoughts, in the time order they come, or in between them as they are situated in the mind space. And that is an incredibly interesting thing that I'll get back to in another lecture. It also has to do with what we think consciousness is, because we randomly decide that consciousness cannot be in the empty space, because since there is nothing to observe, there can neither be a consciousness. You see the logic to this? There is rather a grand rationale to it, and once established, it becomes completely self-evident. And it doesn't help, these things have been established since at least a couple of millennia. I would say 3 millennia. This has been put in order, and for every time it's repeated, it locks itself even further. And since these areas are by the very model not objects of understanding, empty space defies understanding by its very nature. We sort of see from the outset empty space to be completely lacking in every property. All philosophers have said the same, or thought the same. Actually, I have to regret saying that. None of them have said that expressively, but they started there. That was the ontic mood. It was already decided how existence come into existence. The why question was turned down because we started already with the what question. And if we already have the what question, we can never get to the why question, because all questions and answers has to be formulated in terms of presence. Otherwise, they are not thoughts, they're not objects, they're not thinking, they're not directions, they're not arguments. They are just sheer empty space. Something to be looked down upon. And of course, as always in deconstruction, here we also show that there is a parasitic tendency. Presence becomes dependent on what it is not for its existence, and thereby, as we know, both existence and that openness of emptiness is discouraged. This is something that exacerbates the problem a great deal. It becomes even harder to go down to the real things. But no part of reality or presencing can be outside the knowing or knowingness. That doesn't really make sense. How can we already at the outset say that empty space or the space in between thoughts are a non-locus for investigation? That is something we cannot say. At least not until we properly investigated that to be the case. But none of thinkers and none of humanity until the advent of quantum mechanics have gone into that. It wasn't done by Aristotle, it wasn't either done by Cartesius, David Hume, Jean-Paul Sartre. The whole Western sphere of culture, bar none, no one has looked into this, because we defined reality to be existent or derivations of different existence, whether that outermost existence is the archaea of water, atoms, or just pure existence, it doesn't matter. Everything stems from this original. Therefore, everything is existence. Also something that has been mentioned many times by Edward de Bono how this polarity cripples thinking and makes thinking actually impossible. That's why he invented the word asymmetric thinking, to sort of take it apart from the automata of organization. Both are necessary to be successful in your doing and your thinking, your planning, but they should always be separated. Once we mix the two, which we are doing in the Western Hemisphere, we run into considerable problems. We confuse the goal with what exists. Both goal and existence should go hand in hand. Sometimes the goal should go first hand, and then we define the existence after that, because somehow it all started with a want somewhere, I would say. The very idea that space could be different is becoming, to my eyes, more and more impossible. How could the Cartesian coordinates not apply to everything? And I think they do, and they cause yet another limitation. It wouldn't make sense otherwise. And the Cartesian coordinate brings nothing but limitations. And it's shown both from topology and quantum mechanics that are ungranted limitations. They simply do not hold. So if it doesn't hold for physics, why on earth should it hold for thinking? Once we notice we can loosen up thinking, making the borders transparent and easing up thinking, not making it as constricting, not building blocks in our mind, blocks in the idea of tiles or something stone-like, it will also be possible to have parallel thinking, because they can occupy the same space as they can in quantum mechanics and in topology. This is what non-localizable space is all about. It's about two things can occupy the very same space. And no wonder we get rushing thoughts when we think they have to follow each other like cattle going into the sty. They don't have to work only that way. They can work in different, more open ways that actually gives a leeway for flexibility in thinking. You can also have a depth of thinking, which I think is fairly well illustrated by fractality. Space is in its depth fractal. By allowing the fractality to come into thinking, you will notice you can deepen your thinking, and by deepening it you can have many meanings at the same go, completely simultaneous. And the more meanings you get in, the more forceful and directed the thinking is. The less meaning you can get in, the less force you have in your thinking. Monosemic being the outmost extreme. I would say monosemic reasoning or monosemic way of being is the most limited you can have before you enter some sort of institution where everything becomes a complete lockdown of self-confirmation. Welcome to modal logic of Dag Westerståhl, maybe. You can have a multitude of thoughts if you don't design specific spaces to them. If you let them, instead of occupying space, be what they are, be just thoughts, Don't force them into pre-made molds that they have to fit to be even considered to be a thought. Coming into this wider openness, all of a sudden thinking is not that crowded. You feel a relaxation in the system, and by taking in the space around you, you will also affect the space you have in your mind. Mind space and outer space goes hand in hand, and all of a sudden your inner awareness can be more encompassing, and you can find thoughts that were very hard to get before. They are no longer distanced to you by the very area they are designated to have, or the area that they occupy. In this wider awareness, we know both from neurology and the science of cognition, you get this more wider focus, and you can reach your thoughts and your thinking. Of course, this is incredibly important for memory training and getting a better memory. I would say it's absolutely essential. Otherwise, you get just this piling of thoughts, and the ones that's beneath are going to be very hard to reach. This is definitely one of the causes why so many people who train memory still don't get any better. In this gestalt, any progress is taken out of the prospect from the very beginning. It is the structured polarity that blocks out memory and thinking as well. It's not so hard either to see Cartesius as being the one who says there can be no awareness if there is no thinking, because he equalizes. How could he do that? He equalizes himself with his thoughts, and his thoughts are the thinking that comes by itself, by him observing the world, something that is an automatic process made by himself. It's a dual relationship that is deictic, pointing to itself, from the ego to the objects, from the objects to the ego. He doesn't see any higher way of being. Cartesius didn't see a soul in human beings because he relegated human beings to be these lower kind, almost dog-like creatures that looked around with a snout in the air, and whatever caught their attention became thinking automatically, and that was himself. A sort of self-identification that is rather a nasty closure. Very, very uncomfortable way of being. You can also see this as chaotic systems, because they need this leeway, the readiness, the freedom of being thoughts, and also being different things like empty space coming in as a radical difference. And that is something that will make the chaotic system strong. This strength is the direction and the power of thought. It's also the elevation of thought. So you can say, in this take, René Descartes had a lower chaotic thinking system. In order for him to progress to a higher chaotic system, he would have to break in some ways the older system, because there is a stability very similar to the lower working of a diseased heart that can only be broken by force and big intent, because this is a doing. And this is the reason all the thinking of René Descartes was so lowly. It's not high thoughts. It's very good with expressing himself, but as a thinker or as a spiritual person, he really sucks, because saying that the self-evident things around you is all what it is to a human being is degrading human existence to the lowest point. You can get much higher, and you don't have to have this lower ego awareness that is completely dependent on the objects that it more or less creates by itself, without any entering of something radically other or difference. And of course, as Derrida showed, it can be neither understanding nor can there be depth to anything, whether that is read, experienced, the picture you look at, without this deep depth of mind. And today we know that this has disappeared from the intellectual arena, and also when it comes to arts. Today art is completely two-dimensional, and it's usually two-dimensional both in the length variety and the breadth variety, because the very objects that are depicted are self-confirming objects. You look at a painting today not to see something different. You look to see something that is already in yourself, in a lower way, some sort of subjective emotional content, like the art of Lars Vilks, which I greatly think to be very low compared to proper art. You only confirm yourself. It's a sort of art that appeals to a very egotistical, self-closed person, not someone who wants to look out for the world, not the creative thing of the Renaissance painters that didn't look like same, and it didn't look like a reality. Vermeer actually wrote about that, despite the idea of the low reality, the self-confirming, repetitive, always same and easy to paint. And what is modern art if not extremely easy to paint or do? And that's the purpose. It wants to show the onlooker nothing but sameness. The same repetitive, grey, depressing sameness that person feels in its heart. The message coming, the modern world is depressing, accept it, is a little bit like the philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre or Camus. Reality is horrible, but it makes that the center, the self-confirmed center. Nothing coming from outside, nothing of fractality, nothing of a surprise, nothing of radical difference or otherness. It's like looking at a package of cornflakes. In this way you look at it every single day with a mind that is completely tired of repetition, so it doesn't have the fractal energy to construe a reality that's interesting. And early 7 o'clock in the morning you watch this box of cornflakes. That is the art of the modernist era. It is completely self-confirming, and this is also the reason why modern people, I think there is less than 0.1% that can perceive the depth in Renaissance art today. Most say they look realistic, even the least they wanted, and a lot of people say they look photo-like. How utterly depressing, how degrading for the poor Renaissance artist. I think Renaissance art should be locked away into a cellar until people are truly able to look at them in a fresh view. Otherwise we are degrading them with this incredibly limited way of looking at it, because the subject is deceased, almost, to take a term from Ian McGilchrist, and it wants perverted, simplified things, crude, where you only see a surface and nothing but the surface. I say thank you very much, and I wish you all a pleasant afternoon.